D.B. Cooper, 1971, has a wild scheme to jump out of the back of an airplane at 10,000 feet in the middle of the night in a rainstorm over unknown territory.
Well, I think it's a great mystery. You know, what happened to this guy? The last thing we knew is he had $200,000 and bailed out of the back of a 727 November 24th, 1971.
Hundreds of troops combed the woods near Woodland and east to the town of Ariel. The search for Cooper and his $200,000 went on for weeks, but nobody really knew where he bailed out, where he landed, or even if he survived.
The date is November 24th, 1971. The location: the Pacific Northwest of the United States. Outside, a freezing rain is falling and temperatures are below zero. At an altitude of 10,000 feet, traveling at 300 kilometers per hour, the rear stairs of a Boeing 727 suddenly open mid-flight, and a man in a black suit and sunglasses leaps into that dark void with $200,000 strapped to his waist. No one ever saw him again. No body, no parachute, not even a trace of the man himself, until 9 years later. The D.B. Cooper case, the only unsolved air piracy case in FBI history, was not just a robbery. It was a perfect escape plan, or so we thought. Because years later, in 1980, the money found on the banks of the Columbia River made the story more complicated instead of clarifying it. When scientists examined the microscopic organisms, diatoms, on the money, they noticed a terrifying inconsistency that the FBI had either hidden or overlooked for years. In this video, you won't just watch a robbery. We will discuss the strongest suspects for who Cooper might be, the metal particles found on his tie that lead us to secret government projects, and the scientific data proving why that money couldn't have been buried there on that date. Stay until the end of the video, because that biological evidence on the money will change everything you know about whether Cooper survived the jump. It all began the night before Thanksgiving. It was one of the busiest times for air traffic in America. A middle-aged man, about 6 feet tall, with black hair and using the name Dan Cooper, approached the Northwest Orient Airlines counter at Portland International Airport. He was wearing a black suit, a white shirt, and a black tie. He carried only a briefcase. He bought his ticket with cash for just $20. Back then, airport security wasn't like it is today. There were no metal detectors, and no bag searches were conducted. Cooper boarded Flight 305 bound for Seattle, like a tired businessman returning from a trip, and sat in the very last row, seat 18E. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper handed a note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. In those days, it was common for businessmen traveling alone to give their phone numbers to flight attendants. Florence put the note in her pocket without reading it. However, Cooper leaned toward her and whispered, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." When the flight attendant opened the note, she saw that chilling message neatly written with a felt-tip pen. "I have a bomb in my briefcase. I want you to sit next to me." When Florence sat down, Cooper partially opened his briefcase. Inside were red cylinders, wires, and a large battery. This was no joke.
This is the man who pulled off the only successful skyjacking in U.S. history.
Cooper's demands were clear: $200,000 in cash, in negotiable American currency. Additionally, he wanted 4 parachutes, 2 primary, 2 reserve, and a fuel tanker to refuel the plane when they landed in Seattle. What was interesting was that Cooper was unlike any other hijacker. He was calm, polite, and never raised his voice. Flight attendant Tina Mucklow said of him, "He wasn't mean or cruel, He seemed quite nice. He even tried to pay for the bourbon and soda he drank during the flight and offered tips to the attendants. But beneath this kindness lay a cold-blooded intelligence with every step planned.
He's talking about Mexico City. He's watching those people. I think if we can get them away from the airplane, then it can give us a chance if we have to. If we can't get this thing fueled, we're all going to have to run to it. So we're trying to get them alerted to this possibility. So we get the people out of here, then we wouldn't have to worry about that.
There was no robbery crew in this story. Cooper was alone. But the crew who shared those fear-filled hours with him gave us the most important clues about who he was. Specifically, flight attendant Tina Mucklow was the person who stayed in contact with Cooper for the longest time. Who was this man? According to FBI profiles, Cooper was no ordinary criminal. He was proficient in aviation terminology. While the plane circled over Seattle, he looked down and said, "That looks like Tacoma down there." He also knew that McChord Air Force Base was only a 20-minute drive from Seattle-Tacoma, SeaTac, Airport. These details suggested he was someone familiar with the area, likely with a military background. The biggest clue about Cooper's identity was hidden in the only thing he left behind, that cheap black clip-on tie. Years later, a research group called Citizen Sleuths examined this tie with an electron microscope. What they found was shocking. There were particles of pure titanium, bismuth, and antimony on the tie. In 1971, pure titanium was an extremely rare material. It was typically used in chemical production facilities or advanced aerospace projects like Boeing's supersonic transport project. This situation suggested that Cooper might have been an engineer at Boeing, a technician, or a specialist in metallurgy. These microscopic dust particles on his tie indicated that he wasn't a blue-collar worker, but a white-collar technical staff member who wore a tie.
The first hard evidence that he jumped out there was found by a hunter in the woods, part of the exit sign from the door of the aircraft. The Cooper mystery and legend have not died with time. The tale still rolls through these hills and the rumors persist.
Over the years, the FBI examined more than 1,000 suspects. Some of them had truly interesting profiles. Richard McCoy, a former Green Beret who carried out a similar robbery just months after the Cooper incident. However, his physical features did not match Cooper. Robert Rackstraw, a Vietnam veteran, explosives expert, and a dark figure alleged to have links to the CIA. For years, he was claimed to be Cooper, but the evidence remained insufficient. Sheridan Peterson, a Boeing employee and a smoke jumper, a firefighter who parachutes into forest fires. He was one of the people who most closely fit Cooper's profile. However, Cooper was never definitively matched with any of these names. He came and went like a ghost. Why would a person risk jumping into a storm from 10,000 feet? Just for money? Tina Mucklow asked him during the flight why he chose Northwest Airlines. Cooper laughed and said, "It's not because I have a grudge against your airline, it's just because I have a grudge." Grudge. This word was the key. 1971 was a difficult year for the aviation industry. In Seattle, Boeing had laid off thousands of people after the cancellation of the supersonic transport project. There were so many unemployed engineers and technicians in the city that a billboard was put up saying, will the last person leaving Seattle please turn out the lights? When the titanium particles on Cooper's tie and his grudge statement are combined, it appears the motivation wasn't just to get rich. Could this have been an act of revenge against the system, the aviation industry that had put him out on the street? Perhaps Cooper was a disgruntled Boeing employee who had lost his job and fallen into financial hardship, yet knew every bolt on the plane and the local airspace. Additionally, Cooper knew the technical specifications of the aircraft very well. The Boeing 727 was one of the rare passenger planes with rear-opening air stairs. Cooper knew these stairs could be opened during flight. This information was unknown to the civilian population at the time. It was even a method used by the CIA for dropping troops during secret operations in Vietnam. Cooper's knowledge of this detail shows how well equipped he was when making his decision. Around 5:24 p.m., the plane landed at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Cooper kept his word. After the money and parachutes arrived, he allowed the passengers to disembark. However, he continued to hold some of the crew hostage. While the plane was being refueled, Cooper was tense. He didn't like that the money came in a canvas bag. To set up his own rig, he cut one of the reserve parachutes and used its cords to try and secure the money to his body. Cooper gave the pilots the route: Mexico, Mexico City. But he had conditions. The plane was to fly below 10,000 feet. Wing flaps were to be at 15 degrees, which slows the plane down. The cabin was not to be pressurized, and the landing gear was to remain down. It was impossible for the plane to reach Mexico City with this configuration, so it was decided to refuel in Reno, Nevada. At 7:40 p.m., the plane took off again. Inside were only Cooper, the pilots, and flight attendant Tina Mucklow. Cooper told Tina to go to the cockpit, close the door, and not come out again. When Tina looked back one last time, she saw Cooper tying the bag full of money to his waist. Around 8 p.m., a warning light came on in the cockpit. The rear door had been opened. The cabin pressure changed. The noise from outside was deafening. Air at -7 degrees Celsius and rain were pouring in. At 8:13 p.m., the pilots felt the tail section of the plane suddenly lift. This was the moment the aerodynamic balance changed. According to experts, that was the exact second Cooper threw himself off the stairs into the void.
Right now we're on Tina Bar. We're looking at the location where the money was found. Tomorrow we're going to be heading off to look at unpublished photos from the Oregonian newspaper, which could tell us exactly what was going on here at that time.
The plane was being trailed by two F-106 fighter jets, but they couldn't see him due to the slow speed Cooper requested and the darkness. Cooper glided toward the wild forested area in southwestern Washington state, likely near Ariel or the Washougal River. Below him was pitch darkness, dense trees, and raging rivers. It is believed he was wearing only loafers and a light raincoat.
Hundreds of troops combed the woods near Woodland and east to the town of Ariel. The search for Cooper and his $200,000 went on for weeks, but nobody really knew where he bailed out, where he landed, or even if he survived.
After Cooper's jump, the FBI launched the largest manhunt in history under the code name Norjack, Northwest Hijacking.
Died with time. The tale still rolls through these hills, and the rumors.
However, political and military connections come into play at this point. The parachutes Cooper requested were not military style, but he knew how to use them skillfully. Some theorists suggested that Cooper was a soldier who had taken part in secret black ops in Vietnam, which is why he was so skilled at vanishing. Allegations that suspect Robert Rackstraw was connected to the CIA and linked to events like the Iran-Contra scandal were discussed for years. Some even claim that the FBI deliberately didn't catch Cooper because he was an untouchable asset working for the state. However, none of these theories were ever definitively proven. In 2016, after 45 years, the FBI announced it was moving the file from active investigation status. They cited the need to redirect resources to higher priority issues. But closing the file didn't end the mystery. On the contrary, with the money found in 1980, everything was just beginning.
The break in the 9-year-old investigation came Sunday when Dwayne and Patricia Ingram's 8-year-old son overturned some sand while walking the shoreline of the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington. The public learned in an FBI news conference Tuesday, little Brian Ingram unearthed several packets of deteriorated $20 bills, and the FBI confirmed it. It was indeed several thousand of the $200,000 that bailed out with D.B. Cooper on the eve of Thanksgiving back in 1971.
We've reached the most crucial point of the story. February 10th, 1980, exactly 9 years after the event. While 8-year-old Brian Ingram was having a picnic with his family at a beach called Tina Bar on the banks of the Columbia River, he found bundles of rotted money just a few inches below the sand. A total of $5,800 in $20 bills. The serial numbers matched the FBI's list perfectly. Everyone initially thought Cooper had dropped the money during the jump, or that it fell into the river and drifted there.
Well, we were going to make a campfire, and we found it. It was partially on top of the ground, you know. It was just beneath the sand.
Who found it?
Well, my son and I found it together.
But science stepped in here and changed the story. In recent scientific analyses, the algae called diatoms on the money were examined. The type of diatom found was Asterionella formosa. This species only reproduces in that region during the spring and summer. Cooper, however, had jumped in November, in the winter. If the money had fallen into the water that night and washed ashore, it should have had winter diatoms on it, but it didn't. What does this mean? This means that the money entered the water months after the jump, likely in the spring or summer of 1972. In other words, Cooper did not lose the money that night. The money stayed dry somewhere. Perhaps Cooper survived, hid the money, and months later threw some of it down the river as a decoy? Or did he bury the money somewhere and it drifted away when the river rose? This money found by Brian Ingram is the only physical evidence left by Cooper's ghost. The FBI may have closed the file, but science and citizen sleuths are still on the trail. The titanium tie and the money with summer diatoms scream that Cooper did not die in those woods that night, and that the story is far more complex than we know. D.B. Cooper didn't just jump out of a plane that night. He jumped into one of history's greatest mysteries and vanished into thin air along with $200,000. Perhaps he is somewhere right now, in his 90s, watching this video and smiling. Thanks for watching. See you in the next mystery.